Welcome to the No Destination Podcast. I'm Dylan Kight. We're going to talk about what happens after the record is finished. We've talked about all the songs on Late Bloomer, and in those episodes, we unpacked everything from the stories that inspired them, to the musicians who played on the record, to the gear, to how I changed as a person. And now we've done that. We've gone through the list, and there was other songs that didn't make the record, but that's for a different time. We've covered all of the songs that have been released. And last week, Laughing Heart came out. And so I just wanted to thank everybody who has taken time to listen to Laughing Heart, share Laughing Heart, add it to a playlist. All those things go a long way to helping get the music out there. So thank you so much for that. We're now entering a period where I'm dreaming up the next record. And I've started to think about how I look at these projects. I've referred to it as finding yourself. And that might be misguided, honestly. I heard something on social media this week that said something to the effect of, your life is not about finding yourself. It's about building yourself. And when you understand that, then you realize how much you have in your control. And that really resonated with me because finding yourself is one way to put it, but building yourself kind of tilts it on its head a little bit. And I'm going into this next project with a completely different point of view. I learned a whole lot making Late Bloomer, creatively, personally, financially, about what it takes to make a record and put out a record in today's day and age. But building yourself, if that's what we're here to do, that makes a lot more sense because I'm not starting over. I'm not entering this period with no knowledge. I'm building off the knowledge that I gained, the inspiration that I have from Late Bloomer in a Wallflower Suit. So every album feels like a bridge or a chapter or even a world unto itself. And a lot of times I talk about that's who you're becoming or you're finding out a theme. And, no longer are we going to be looking backwards on Late Bloomer and in other ways. We're letting that go. It is a part of our fabric now. If you're in this community, you've probably already heard it. And if you haven't, now's a great time to go ahead and listen to Late Bloomer in a Wallflower Suit. But this isn't about revisiting the songs. It's about what comes after that. So in the previous episode, I talked a little bit about my fear, even before we started mixing the record, about how do you know when you're starting to write songs for the next record? Because that last session that I had done was very fruitful for Late Bloomer. And almost to the point where I was like, well, should we put another session on the books? Like, 'cause this session was really good. But, how do you know when you're entering a new phase? And I've taken classes, and I think lessons are great. It's kind of like how people frown upon people that put work into trying to better themselves. And I've been fortunate to take some songwriting group classes online with Buck Meek from Big Thief, who is great and had some just great bits of wisdom to share. But one of the questions I asked, how do you know when you're writing for the next album? And I think that it's an unfair question because I don't know if there's really a way to know that for somebody else. I think that is so unique to the person. There was a period in the fall when I made the decision that all the tracking was done. Like, we were done with the record and it was entering just the mixing phase, where I knew that anything I wrote from this period, this point on, was going to be in consideration or a part of a new batch. What I can share is that there are stories that I'll tell a couple different ways. And there's songs that sound different, that this song maybe has some similar twist. And that's me just trying to get it to a point where I think either I've hidden enough of my own, DNA or personal trauma from the situation, and it actually can stand on its own as a song. Because as much as I've joked about therapy is great, I do want to create music where people find their own truths. Like, that is important to me. And so I do find myself kind of working through songs and kind of moving through them as a way to get to a point where I'm telling a truer version of what I'm trying to get across. So back to last fall, when I knew that we were done tracking the album, Late Bloomer and Wallflower Suit, and I asked that question about, like, how do you know you're done? I wrote a song called Strangely Fun. And it's a cool song. I like it. But it sounded different. And almost like I used some different things melodically to push it further away from the way Late Bloomer sounded. And lyrically, it's a little bit different. And what I can compare it to is it's kind of like leaving a long-term relationship and dating somebody who is like the complete opposite of the person that you were just with, almost as a way to like, this must be what is meant for me, was that first song I wrote. But I spent a lot of the winter writing songs and figuring out what are the stories that I want to tell. And what's so unique now is that I didn't know where it was all leading up to with Late Bloomer. Now I have such a better idea making that record on how I would approach this next record that it's hard for me not to look at the 10,000 foot view and just stay really focused at the song level. So I wrote probably about 30 songs and whittled those down. And there's about 16 that I want to bring to the band now and really try to woodshed parts and start trimming the fat of those things. The good news is thinking about recording the follow-up in the winter so we could maybe release something next spring or summer. Like, that would be really cool. So that's what I've been spending a lot of the time as I was putting out the record, getting vinyl made, doing vinyl masters, doing mastering for digital, doing artwork and all that stuff. I was kind of like working in parallel. And the thing that Late Bloomer taught me, besides the things that we've shared, is just I would be a lot more pragmatic about this process next time. A lot more finite about, hey, these are the sessions. This is what we're looking to do. You know, I was telling a story and I was kind of building the bridge as I was walking across it, so to speak. And so it was a little bit difficult. But one of the things I learned is that was definitely a more expensive way to go, BT dubs. So I would be a lot more intentional about those sessions and setting those up. And if you're thinking about an album project, and even if you're recording at home, I think it's really important to find your way through a process. I can just share what worked for me and what didn't work. I have experience making good sounding records at the house with friends and musicians. And the thing that I've always battled with is, what's the difference between a demo and the final thing? It's typically the drum take, just for anyone who's wondering. But for me, you know, that's been something, you know, I'll make a bunch of demos and it's like, well, maybe I can just have Robbie play drums on this or Chris play drums on this or whatever. And then that kind of becomes the challenge, is like, well, when am I not doing a demo versus like recording something? And then when you record at home, things can just kind of go on forever. And there's some really great albums that are made over long periods of time. I think for where I'm at, I'm really interested in collecting moments, like musical moments, and being intentional about that, more like snapshots. And so one of the things that Late Bloomer taught me is I would be a lot more intentional about the sessions. And I think that changed me because it's a lot less aspirational as far as how the process should look. Now that I've been through it in a professional studio again, I know exactly where I spent too much time, where I didn't spend enough time, and never cheap out on the drum takes. Andy and I definitely figured out a process that really clicked towards the end of that, which is we did the drums and a lot of the frameworks of the songs, big room. And then we did a lot of the stuff either in his home studio or remotely, like my studio, his home studio. So I'd be intentional about that. The other thing that I learned making Late Bloomer was to be more trusting of the process. So I shared, like, the first song I wrote was a song called Strangely Fine. And you'll probably never hear that song, and that's intentional. But is to trust the process, because as I was writing a bunch of songs, I kept trying to go to that 10,000 foot view and like, well, what am I trying to say here? Like, what is the story? And it's like, no, just trust the process. Like, just make the songs as good as they can be, and like, don't get overwhelmed with like the 10,000 foot view. Because I was so happy with how Late Bloomer turned out it's hard not to kind of go to that level and get really deep into the weeds about the bigger messaging, like what's the album work going to look like and all this stuff, which leads me to my next point. One of the things I learned is I would have finished the entire record first, come up with a cohesive visual for the record, and done singles off of that. And then that would have all tied into the album. But because of how it was recorded, and there was that gap after the Brilliant Mistakes record, and I was playing a lot of shows, and I was just trying to get music out there, there was like a lot of different versions of covers, not cover songs, but covers of the singles. So that's definitely one of the things, and that's being like less aspirational about the recording process. I was just really excited to share stuff because I was really happy about the way things were turning out, which is totally normal. And I think there's something to getting that feedback and putting things out, because that's a great part of the creative process. But I think waiting a couple months and really waiting until everything was final and then coming up with a cohesive visual that matched the album, then could filter it into the singles, is what I'll do differently the next time. The other thing that happened making Late Bloomer and Wallflower Suit is I went by like 3 different project names during this process. And so this kind of gets into really the biggest part of what I want to talk about, the in-between cycle of Late Bloomer and Wallflower Suit and the next record, is what I struggled with making Late Bloomer and Wallflower Suit as an artist was I started the project as a band. Like those songs started as like songs I was writing for a band. The band broke up trying to record the album. I put out songs under Brilliant Mistakes, some of the earliest mixes of the record, and it was clear that wasn't the best option at the time. People that were in that band it was very fresh and raw for folks, and it would have been easier if I would have just kept on that path and put everything out as Brilliant Mistakes, but people felt a certain kind of way when I put new music out under Brilliant Mistakes because they weren't on it, and I totally get that as a person, like that makes sense. And so I pulled it off streaming platforms. And because they're band songs, I'm like, well, I need a band name. I spent so long trying to come up with a new band name that I thought could represent this project. And it's almost harder because like the world is created, and now I've got to come up with like, I've already got a movie title, and now I got to come up with like a production company that like somehow is tied. It just all didn't make sense. So I didn't come up with a great band name during this process. And when I had been playing solo before I was in Brilliant Mistakes, before Brilliant Mistakes was Dark Horses, before Dark Horses was Dylan, Kight, and the Nightbirds, and that came after Daydream Deferred and Casamino. And I was like, listen, let's just put it out as Dylan, Kight, and the Nightbirds, because it's like these are band songs, and I don't know. In my head, like it needed a band name. Just follow me here. This is one of the things that I struggled with. Like now you're getting insight into how nuts I was making this record. And so I put out a couple singles under Dylan, Kight, and the Nightbirds. The trouble is like the Nightbirds isn't a real band. Now it would have been way better if I would have just had a project name, not Dylan, Kight, and the whatever, just like Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit or Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Now there's a lot more of a foundation of musicians that I've been playing with. But at the time, there wasn't a foundation of musicians. It was just Andy, Andrew, Michael, and myself. And it was kind of a group of musicians, for sure, but not a band. And so I put out a couple singles as Dylan, Kight, and the Nightbirds. And then that didn't resonate with me personally, follow me on this, because I was like, I'm going to put together a band called Dylan, Kight, and the Nightbirds. And then it's not going to click with anybody because people are going to meet the people in Nightbirds, and it's not the same people, but those other people were never the Nightbird. Again, I got way into my own head. So put out a couple singles as Dylan, Kight, and the Nightbirds. And then I was like, I don't want to be attached to Dylan, Kight, and the Nightbirds forever. I know. You're rolling your eyes. Like you're on the way to work. You're at the gym. You're on a treadmill. You're walking in your neighborhood. And you're like, why is this guy unraveling? And I was unraveling because I wanted the name to matter. I wanted the name to be tied to this project, but I didn't have a good name. And so using the older moniker that we had, Dylan, Kight, and Nightbirds, made sense at first because it was kind of like this catch-all of a backing band for my solo albums. And then about 6 months before the record, I was like, I'm just going to put it out as Dylan, Kight. And now here's the thing. I didn't put out as Dylan, Kight because Dylan, Kight's so great. because that's not what make the songs work. The songs came across the way they did because of the musicians who played on it, how well they played, and the people who have listened to those songs and allowed them to, gave them space. And in a weird way, like I feel just like a custodian of the songs. I'm not a star. I'm not even like a front man. Like I see some bands and I'm like, oh man, that guy does it, or gal. They just crush it. They're great front people. But I always like the idea of a project name. And maybe that's because I came up in like indie rock bands and bands that were a little bit more off the beaten path. The name thing never made sense because I wasn't trying to market myself. And you're laughing because you're maybe either watching this on YouTube or a podcast. Like, well, what do you think you're doing now? The difference is when I put out the music, I struggle with what to put it out under. So again, if I had waited to put out the singles, it could have been a lot more cohesive. I definitely think I muddied the water putting out the songs the way that I did. And then that ramped the album. There was like 3 singles and then the record. It was all under Dylan Kight. But there wasn't a ton of momentum. It would have been a whole lot better if it would have been all under the same thing, in my opinion. So those are like the tactical things I learned, just like being a lot more intentional about the sessions, being a little bit more prepared would be a difference. I'm a big believer in being well-versed in the songs enough that you can change them as much as you need to. So when you get there, you can really start to carve them up if they're not opening up the way that you want them to. I think that voice memos, like if you're an iPhone user, I don't know what the Android version is, but like just like a simple recording of you and acoustic guitar or a rehearsal is a really great way to demo a song. I know there's people who are amazing in their DAW recording their own music and they come up with really elaborate demos, but now the demos sound so good, it's like you could just put a little bit more effort and make those the finished things. I rather the songs not be finished or approach that kind of funnel until I'm a little bit further in the process, personally. I would say my favorite part of the record was getting to share it. There were times where I didn't know if these songs would ever come out. There was a conversation with Michael and I, and at some point after we had finished like 3 songs or maybe 5 songs, he was like, yeah, I mean, like we don't have to put them out. And I was like, oh, I guess that's true. But it's been really great at how people have responded. It's been great to put them out into the world and just see what happens. And again, it's like, I think that act is such a rebellious act in a world that isn't asking for those things, but somehow needs it to be understood. That was my favorite part. If you're approaching this from a budgetary standpoint, I would say things that I didn't take into consideration originally planning this record. Building a buffer, so if you need to go and make any kind of tracking adjustments or even if it's remote sessions, look at your budget as far as mixing, tracking. And mastering is different. Mastering is not as nearly as expensive as recording, but like that all goes to the budget. And then when you go to release the record, are you going to do a physical release? I chose to do a physical release because I felt this is just one of those projects that I was a part of where I wanted it to have a physical copy, but there was artwork consideration that cost money. There was printing the record. Now I chose Ecobase based in Athens, Georgia. They did a phenomenal job on the record. And they actually ran a Black Friday deal, so I got a pretty good discount that they ran last year, and that aligned with my project. So I was really fortunate to have that. But that's where kind of like if you're just looking at the record from like a budgetary standpoint, really think through those things. Like, do I want to put out this physical? Is it just digital? If it's just digital, I mean, that kind of also informs maybe how much effort you want to put into like budget for the record. Back to like the mastering process, for example. There are masters for the digital version of the record and there's masters for the vinyl. So they sound a little bit different for both mediums. Like they're both set up in a way to sound as best as they can in their own individual things. So like vinyl is mixed for vinyl and digital vice versa. Make a checklist. It's going to be tracking. It's going to be mixing. It's going to be mastering. It's going to be putting out the record. What does that look like? If you don't use like a distro kit or something like that, you're going to need to pay a service that's typically pretty nominal, but like all those things, money. And you just have to factor that in. Now, once you, like DistroKid, you pay for the year, and so you can do forever releases and stuff, but doing it by the year, you can release as much stuff as you can per artist, I'm pretty sure, at least on the plan I'm on. So if you keep releasing music, some of these things, you'll save yourself a little bit in the long run by doing it that way. I think the last thing I would say about Late Bloomer, I thought I was trying to prove something to myself with this record. Like that I did have the ability to make the record that I thought was inside my head. And in a really weird way, what this record gave me was peace with who I already was. And that's why I've been so passionate about following whatever it is you're passionate about, because the journey is what gave me that peace of mind. And that's the path that I had to go on. And that's the thing that I thought I was doing the entire time. And then at the very end, it was like, oh, this is who you already are. If you go for a run, you're a runner. You don't have to run like a marathon to be a runner. You don't have to run for 365 days in a row to be a runner. You just ran a mile or whatever distance at whatever speed. Now you're a runner and like that. But the peace with who I already was a big deal. And the space between records is really intriguing, and one that I've thought about, because there's a distance between the creator of whatever medium there is and the audience. And what I mean by that is that creatively, I did everything I did, like as far as like writing, really performing, everything by like the first week of July in 2024. And so I've been writing a lot of songs since then. And so, what may seem like a quiet period between records is actually a period of a lot of activity now. So I will not be talking about Late Bloomer. I know I said it at the beginning of this podcast, but these weekly podcasts, whatever form they may take, I will definitely be talking about current events or records that I love or songs that I'm writing or shows that I played. But the period where like there may be a perception where there's not a ton of activity is probably when I'll be the busiest, because when I was in the studio, I was just like posting about shows or whatever, but I was really burning the candle at both ends. And now that these songs are pretty much written, like I said, I wrote upwards of like 30 songs for this record. There's about, I think 16 that I feel pretty strongly about that I want to see like them through to completion in some form, or how I can make them better and really kind of go in all in on those 16 songs. The next phase will be the recording phase. And so really what I'm saying is like the period that seems quiet is like this, it's October right now. If I go into the studio, the first quarter of 2026, some point, that's kind of I'm aiming to do it. It gets finalized, or like it gets mixed, mastered, all that stuff gets printed. And then let's just say it comes out summer of 2026. That's going to be a window of not a ton of stuff coming out in the Dylan Kight world. There's going to be a ton of stuff going in there. Now, the time that led up into this, where I put out where I was picking the artwork and I was, the mastering stuff was going back and forth, and the record came out and played shows. I think I'll have played almost 20 shows for this record. By the time it's all said and done, I've already kind of sat with that quiet piece between the records of inspiration and the stories that I wanted to tell. And the space that you'll get is like delayed after I stop running my mouth and bothering you on social media. That's where that begins for the listener. It's just kind of interesting how they're two different cycles. But that's kind of where we are. I've written a lot of the songs that are going to be on the next record. That's my plan, to record those songs. And so hopefully you guys will be hearing new songs of mine by the summer. Now, we all know Guns N' Roses had an infinite budget, and it took them 20 years to put out Chinese Democracy, or whatever that was called. So, it is what it is. But, one of the things that I'll harken back to that I talked about earlier in this episode is I never really thought about being a solo artist. That was never really the goal. And there have been times where, album release show, it's called Dylan Kight and the Nightbirds, and that matched the artist name for a while. That was on some of the singles. I told you that the record came out as a Dylan Kight record. I'm not sure that's the direction I want to go with right now. I'm kind of in that space again where I'm just not sure if that's where I want the focal point to be. I don't want the focal point to be me. And that seems weird because I'm putting out music, I'm playing music. But I want the songs and the project to have its own emotional weight. And I think some distance that I can put between that, even if it's just thematically with like a project name or a band name, like that would be helpful. And so I've already started to think about what I would call that project or that band. Because like if you're playing with me now, it is a little weird when it's like, oh, there's Dylan and there's his Nightbirds. It's just weird. In my mind, you're overthinking it. And I may, and I'll probably change my mind a bunch of times. But a part of what's happening between now, the recording sessions and the record coming out is really figuring out, do I want to put this out as a Dylan Kight record? Or do I want to put this out as a new project name? So I did that thing that I do sometimes. I was up late one night thinking about all this stuff, way too much. And I changed all my social media handles to the project name that I thought would be really good. And then I played a couple shows this weekend, and then I realized like my Instagram was like this new thing. And like if you looked me up when you saw me, you're not going to find me. And that happened. And so like somebody like added like my personal Facebook page, which is cool because I'm a dummy and I changed my Instagram. So you couldn't find me on Instagram. So again, my fault, right? I had originally thought about calling the next record The Weather and You. And that is the name that I'm mulling over calling the entire project moving forward. So not just the album, but the band. And the weather in you is kind of it's like a play on words, but it's the way, in my mind, it's the way that somebody feels, and that's not a permanent thing, right? It's like, I'm trying to write songs and sing songs for people that connect with that idea and that maybe don't have the ability to write songs or are waiting to be inspired to write a song. I'm trying to say something in a way that makes somebody feel understood, even if I don't feel understood in the process. Sometimes sharing that misunderstanding, as it were, is a helpful way to connect in my mind. And so there's no marketing team here. There's no label, as you could probably guess. But I'm thinking about putting all of the music moving forward under an artist name, a project name called The Weather and You. And that's what it means to me. The weather and you is just how you feel. And that encapsulates a lot of the songs that I write. It's about the way we feel. And I do think that, like Sturgill Simpson recently changed his name to Johnny Blue Skies. And then he renamed his band The Dark Clouds. So Johnny Blue Skies and The Dark Clouds. Come on, those guys are just so cool and great. But in an effort, when he said why he changed his name is because like he wanted his name back in a certain way, like he wanted a little autonomy is the way I understood it. And not that I want my name back or anything like that, but I just want to give the right space for the songs. And so maybe that's putting that as Dylan Kight. You know what? If you're on YouTube, leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of the name, The Weather and You? Not that it's up for vote, or if you have a really good idea, if like you've got like first of all, I think the best band name of all time is The Band. Let's be honest, right? The Band, come on. But if you have a suggestion as good as that, yours truly is all ears. But yeah, what do you think? Does it matter to you if it's under someone's name or a project name? And then if it's cool, if it's under someone's name, like is it and? I want to lift up the collective of musicians who play with me in a different sort of way, because I take great pride in the musicians I play with. I appreciate their input musically, spiritually, sonically, the way that we're able to connect. And a project name, I think, gives the collective a lot more of the focus than just the person who had maybe the kernel of the idea. Just because I planted the seed, it doesn't mean that, we're going to call apples Dylan Kight now. They're still called apples. So that's what I've been spending a lot of time. And those are the kind of things I really overthink. I think about that. And so I gave the example where somebody added me on Facebook, or tried to. And I changed all my social media handles back to Dylan Kight, so it's a lot easier to find me. But that's the direction I'm thinking about moving, is for that next album cycle, putting it under a project name and then having the music live under that world. I'm really excited about this next batch of songs. I feel like this is, in my opinion, another level up. I feel like I'm telling interesting stories that are more personal, but are more universal. And I can't wait to share those songs with other people. And that's really exciting to me. And so that's what I've been spending a ton of time on. And so think of this period as like the bridge, right? The bridge between Late Bloomer and what comes next. And I'm going to continue to talk about that process. We go through it. And I'm super excited to have a vehicle to be able to do that with you. And I think that's what this median allows for, is, some of my favorite artists, I love to hear their thought process. And I just love hearing people talk about what inspires them, what's going on in their process. And that's what speaks to me. And hopefully that's what speaks to you. And if not, y'all, listen, we can all go back to watching The Bachelor or whatever we're all doing right now. I don't know if that's actually what's happening, but I'll just assume because I don't have cable. Anyway, this has been No Destination. And until next time.